first segment is the 12 sons of Jacob. As we begin the book of Exodus, it begins with the word now. And that word in Hebrew is always a conjunction. That means it's connected to something before, something that came before that. The word actually is wela. Wela is that conjunction that says something happened before. Now I'm gonna repeat that. I'm going to show you again that we're moving forward in this. It's used 107 times, and of most of those times, it is referring to a generation. So the generations are repeated. We're going to read this, and as you see, we're going to see that it's repeated in many different passages. So you can look through your Bible and find all the passages that talk about the sons of Jacob and actually list that genealogy. It is significant, so keep it in mind. Now, these are the names of the children of Israel. By the way, if you're reading NIV, it does not start with now, because NIV is not a translation as such. It's a translation and a paraphrase. That is, they take it and try to put it into words that we can understand, try to make it culturally relevant for us. So it's not exclusively a translation. It is an interpretation of the word. So I'm using King James here, or you can use New King James or some other that follows the translation of the Hebrew more closely. Now, these are the names of the children of Israel. Pause right there. Children of Israel. Somebody asked in our class, why is it called children of Israel? I don't get it. We're talking about Jacob, but why is he called Israel? If you go back in history, you'll find the answer to that. Jacob was wrestling with the angel of the Lord to the breaking of the day. And the angel said, yeah, you got to let me go. The sun's coming up and I need to leave. And he said, I'm not going to let you go unless you bless me. And so he reached down, he touched Jacob's hip, and he made him crippled for the rest of his life. But he also left behind a blessing. And he said, you are now no longer Jacob. You are called Israel, because you are a prince of God. Israel means a prince of God. So that's why we have it here. Now, these are the names of the children of Israel, which came into Egypt. Every man and his household came with Jacob. Now, you remember Joseph was already in Egypt. He had begun to rule with the Pharaoh at 30 years of age. He's probably about 38 years old, 39, because we know he started with the 7 years of prosperity, and then the seven years of famine had already started, and now Jacob's children come to visit and buy food. Every man with his household came with Jacob. They are Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. And all the souls that came out of the loins of Jacob were 70 souls, for Joseph was in Egypt already, and Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. So we have this summary. Now, let's go back. Let's go back a few chapters into Genesis, remembering this is a contiguous story running from Genesis to the end of Deuteronomy, and then spills over into the Promised Land with Joshua. So it's important to see that it's not just an independent book. It is a book that's combined, like the trailers of a train. Genesis chapter 35. Write it down. Genesis chapter 35, verses 23 to 26 is the first listing of the sons of Jacob. Genesis 35, 23 to 26. Now, if I really was clever, I would have that up on the board so you could see it, but I'm not that clever. So that is the first listing. It lists just the 12 sons, almost an exact parallel to this passage. And then in Genesis chapter 46, we have an amplified version of that, beginning at verse 8 through 28. It's an amplified version from Genesis 46, verse 8 to 28, in which there's an exact listing of each of the sons and their children. So we get 70 in all that comes directly from that passage in Genesis chapter 46. Then finally in Genesis chapter 49, we have another reiteration of the children of Israel, of Jacob. And this time Jacob is dying, and he calls his children before him, and each one he gives a prophetic word, or he gives a descriptive title to them, something that describes their life or their characteristics. And I think that's important for us to understand. And so what I've done, rather than us going there and reading the whole thing, which will take some time, I want you to do that, but I won't do it here online. He identifies each of the children and calls them by certain terminologies and certain names. Reuben is the firstborn, and he says, Reuben, you are turbulent as water. I like the King James that says you are unstable as water. Wow. I like to think of this as Jacob putting an epitaph, like a tombstone on each one, and summarizing their life and their characteristics. And as you think of that, think of what kind of tombstones have you seen that have a legend, a little logo that describes a person's life. I think that's significant. The second is Simeon. He said, your swords and weapons of violence will describe you, will really identify you. And Simeon and Levi have the same combined prophecy concerning them, their sword and their weapons of violence. And as I looked at that, I thought, Simeon and Levi were probably the 2 out of the 12 that advocated killing Joseph. Remember, they wanted to kill him, and then Reuben says, no, let's not kill him. Let's throw him into the pit and then decide what to do. And then Judah comes along later and says, let's sell him to all of these Midianites that are passing and send him to Egypt. So Levi and Simeon were men of the sword. And you remember the story of Tamar. They also killed a whole village. So they stand out as this characteristic. And then comes Judah. Judah is a lion's cub. He's kind of the hero. Even though he's not the oldest, he seems to be the strongest among them. And remember, Revelation talks of the Lion of Judah. And out of Judah shall come the king, David, and then later Jesus himself. And then we have Issachar. He called him a raw-boned donkey. I don't think I'd want that on my tombstone. Dick LaFountain, you are a raw-boned donkey. No, I think I'd like something milder than that. Zebulon says he lives by the seashore. I'll take that one. Something to look at and say, well, he enjoyed living by the seashore. He had a nice beach house. That's great. Great to remember him by. Dan, he says, you are a serpent by the roadside, ready to strike. Woo! What a characteristic. Don't want that to be said on my tombstone either. Gad says he attacked. If he's attacked, he will attack back. Well, maybe that should go on my tombstone, because as a child and a teenager, I had quite a temper. And if you attack me, man, you're getting it fourfold. I'm coming back at you, and I'm going to get you. Naphtali is a doe set free, one who bounds through the forest in freedom. That's kind of a nice thing. So how come nobody names their kids Naphtali? It's a beautiful name. And then you have Joseph, and Joseph doesn't receive the blessings of all of the others, but he does receive a blessing from his father here, and it's probably the most flowering of all, because he is the hero. He's a prince among his brethren, which is a wonderful thing for his father to say. And then there's Benjamin. He called him a ravenous wolf. Interesting. Everybody's got a label. Everybody's got a title. Everybody's got a prophetic word about them, because it characterizes their life. In Revelation chapter 14 and verse 13, it says, there was a voice from heaven that said, blessed are those who die in the Lord. From now on, they will be blessed, and they will rest from their labors, and their deeds will follow them. And so it is with us. Our deeds follow us. We are known by our works. We are known by our characteristics. We're known by our temper, or our godliness, or our compassion toward others. So here's a question I want to leave with you, something you can discuss, turn it off after I'm finished here, and discuss. What would define you? What would you like your parents or your perhaps your spouse or your children to define you with? What statement would define you and summarize your entire life? And maybe if that's too close to home and you don't like to talk about you, talk about your own parents. What would you put as a short sentence to describe them, and see what you come up with? May the Lord bless you as you begin that first part of Exodus chapter 1.